Welcome to Ask the Church, our video series where we attempt to answer your questions about theology, church practice, or church worship in under 5 minutes. Today's question is about the Apocrypha. We were asked to give a beginner's guide to reading or studying the Apocrypha. It's a great question because I think the Apocrypha for many people probably feels like this foreign thing that you don't know what to do with. For those of you who don't know, the Apocrypha are a group of books that were written in Greek by the Jewish people in the centuries immediately preceding the birth of Christ. The word Apocrypha itself means hidden, and they were called hidden books in a certain sense because they weren't to be read in worship, or at least some Christians thought that. The other name for these books is the Deuterocanon, and I think it's actually a more helpful name. Deuterocanon means the second canon, like a second tier Old Testament. I want to talk a little bit about the history of them and why we should read them. But before I do, let me answer the question. A beginner's guide to reading or studying the Apocrypha. The basic answer is read them. We ought to read these books. For no other reason, we should read them because they are actually a part of the Jewish people's heritage of what it means to struggle and live as the people of God in the midst of a world. Now, the books themselves contain history that actually illuminate the New Testament because it's the history that immediately leads up to the time of Christ. They contain wisdom writings. They contain a variety of things that are helpful for us. Some of you actually may know the Apocrypha or the Deuterocanon in the Anglican Articles of Religion are actually considered books that we ought to read, but there's a careful distinction made in our Articles of Religion. The Articles of Religion say that we should read these books for the sake of life and morals. In other words, learning what it means to live faithfully as the people of God. But we don't read them to establish doctrine. The reason why we don't read them to establish doctrine is because they have, by and large, been considered sort of second-tier scripture. Things that are a part of the people of God's heritage, but not necessarily inspired. The dispute over these books goes back to the early church. The books were written in Greek and not Hebrew, and that's actually the root of the dispute over what to do with these books. They were part of the Septuagint, the Greek rendition of the Jewish people's scriptures. The apostles who were reading in Greek and the churches who were reading in Greek would have had these books in their copies. Now, that actually makes sense because there's New Testament letters that allude to these books. By the way, and this is sort of an aside, it may surprise some of you to know that the original King James Version of the Bible had these books in them. They were always considered to be sort of a part of the Old Testament, but a sort of subclass of it. The reason why they weren't understood to be fully inspired in the same sense is because they weren't written by the Jewish people in Hebrew. They weren't in the original Hebrew manuscripts. And so there's an argument in the early church, and this is really between St. Jerome, who was living in Bethlehem, translating the scriptures into Latin, and Augustine, the great bishop of Hippo. The argument over these books is, does it have to have been written in Hebrew for it to be fully inspired as a part of the Old Testament? And Jerome said, absolutely. If it's not in Hebrew, it's actually not a part of the Old Testament, at least not on the same level. Augustine, because he doesn't know Hebrew and is reading in Greek, and these books are there in the Greek editions, has a much higher view of them. But even the people who believed that they were to be read in the churches, in other words, that they weren't hidden, they weren't apocrypha, they were just a second canon, still historically regarded them as sort of second-tier scripture. The stance of the Anglican Church has followed St. Jerome. These books weren't a part of the original Hebrew writings, and so therefore they're not to be considered inspired in the same sense. They're just to be read to understand the history of the Jewish people, to grow in our understanding what it means to live as the people of God in the world, but we don't establish doctrine out of them. That said, it's actually really important, I think, that we actually begin to read them because they teach us a great deal about the time of Christ. They give a lot of the background to the things that happen in the Gospels. They help us understand the thinking of the Jewish people. And they should encourage us and inspire us in our faith because they actually give us examples of the people of God seeking to be faithful to God. So the basic advice for them is go read these books. Get a copy of the ESV Bible that has the Apocrypha in it, or just look it up online and read them. Start with the book of Judith It's a wonderful story about a faithful Jewish heroine who saves her people because she believes in God. Read the Maccabees, the series of books that are about the history of the reestablishment of the Jewish kingdom in the 2nd century BC. All of these things will encourage you to strengthen your faith, and they're great for the Christian to read. I hope that this helps. Thanks for watching another edition of Ask the Church. If you have questions, feel free to email them to me at stephen@incarnationrichmond.org. That's Stephen with a V at incarnationrichmond.org. And now, go in the grace of our God.